Look at verse 22. Professing to be wise, they became fools. The ungodly believe they are wise. Isn't that true? Doesn't that describe our culture today? That they're so wise to reject God, wise to be skeptical of God, wise to reject the truth of God, wise to doubt the Bible, wise to reinterpret the Bible. It's very intellectual, very scientific. I'm a scientist, I'm into science, as if the Bible is not scientific. Look what it says, they're fools. They think they're wise by doing that, but they're actually fools. They're fools. You know, back in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is understanding." Wisdom begins with the fear and reverence of the Lord. These are people that don't revere God. They don't fear the Lord. The ungodly are fools because they reject God, and they rationalize it by believing they are wise to reject God. But they're actually fools. If you're taking notes, the word fools here, it's the Greek word morano. We get the word moron from this word. The ungodly who believe they are wise to live without God and refuse to acknowledge God, they're not wise, they're morons. They're morons. Especially because they are provoking God to wrath by their ungodliness. I mean, that is the most unwise, moronic thing a person can do. Provoke God to wrath. Now watch what happens next in verse 23. Not only do the ungodly suppress the truth that is clearly revealed by God, they also create their own gods for a substitute for the true God. This is insane. Look at verse 23. They change the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. They invent alternative gods to worship and honor and glorify instead of the true God. They create gods that agree with them and their way of life. This provokes God to wrath. Understandably. I mean, think about it. God reveals himself to mankind through his creation, through the conscience, and man pretends like he can't see it. And then man creates alternative gods to worship instead of the true God. Man invents false gods, even a false Jesus that accommodates their sin. My Jesus would allow me to do this. My Jesus isn't judgmental. My Jesus doesn't condemn. A God that agrees with their sinful ways. And they call themselves wise to do this. We're wise to do this. So understandably, this provokes God to wrath. Understandably, this makes God angry. So what does God do in his wrath? Well, look at verse 24. Verse 24, it says, "Therefore," because of everything we just read from verses 18 to 23, "therefore God gave them up." God gave them up. Look down at verse 26. "For this reason, God gave them up." Look at verse 28. God gave them over. 3 times in this passage it says God gave them up or God gave them over. And this is known as the wrath of God's abandonment. The wrath of God's abandonment, if you're taking notes. These are people that are under God's wrath. And they're under God's wrath of abandonment. God's wrath is seen in different ways in the scriptures. For example, there is the wrath of the flood in the days of Noah. God judged the entire earth with the flood. That was God's wrath. There is the judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah when God rained down fire and brimstone upon those cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and destroyed them. That was God's wrath. There is the future wrath that will take place at the end of the age on the earth during the 7-year tribulation period that's described in Revelation chapters 6 to 19, that's a type of God's wrath. Those are all types of God's wrath we find in the Bible. Here we have another kind of God's wrath. It's not fire and brimstone. It's not a flood. This is the wrath of abandonment. This is the wrath of abandonment. This is when God abandons a person or abandons a society or abandons a nation to their sin. They suppress the truth, constantly suppressing the truth about God that he is revealing over and over, day and night through creation. There is a God, there is a God, there is a God, testifying in them. They've got their conscience, the law of God written on their heart, and they just keep ignoring that law and ignoring that law and ignoring that law and suppressing the truth. And there's a point where God will just abandon that person or that nation, that society to their sin. And God just turns them over. And God turns his back on them and he abandons them.